The emergency beacon died mid-transmission, and Commander Jake Morrison knew humanity had made its decision. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the final human diplomatic vessel powered down its docking clamps. Outside the viewing ports, Earth's entire fleet began jumping to slipspace, one ship after another vanishing in brilliant flashes of blue light. Ambassador Krell of the Thaxian Confederacy reached toward the communication panel, his forearms trembling. Nothing. Every human frequency had gone dark. No explanation, no farewell address, just the systematic withdrawal of an entire species from galactic civilization. The humans had been part of the Council for only 37 years, but in that time they had changed everything. They built the quantum relay network that connected 12,000 worlds. They trained half the galaxy's medical corps. They shared their agricultural techniques that ended famines on 42 planets. And now they were gone. Lieutenant Sophie Grant stood at the helm of the carrier Resolute as it made the final jump from Council space. Behind her, Captain Ben Hayes watched the tactical display. 1,800 human ships, carrying everyone who had lived or worked beyond Earth's solar system, now traveled toward coordinates only they knew. Back in the Council chamber, Magistrate Vaughn collapsed into his seat. The Zephyrian leader had served for 2 centuries, but nothing prepared him for this. Humans didn't leave over territorial disputes or trade disagreements. They left because the Council had refused to act when the Crithian Empire enslaved the peaceful Diluvian people. The humans had begged, argued, and pleaded for intervention. When the Council cited non-interference protocols for the 5th time, the humans simply thanked everyone for their hospitality and walked away. Sophie checked the navigation computer, 300 light-years to the edge of explored space, then another 500 into the void. The convoy would establish a new civilization, far from Council bureaucracy. Every ship carried seeds, technology, and the determination that made humanity dangerous when pushed too far. Krell activated his personal recorder. He needed to document this moment. In 3 decades, humanity had introduced concepts the Council never considered: worker rights, democratic reforms, the radical idea that advanced civilizations had a moral duty to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. These ideas now spread through younger Council species like wildfire, and the old guard couldn't stop them. The last human ship, a medical frigate named the Hope, paused at the border. Dr. Lisa Chen transmitted a single data package to Council medical facilities. Complete cure specifications for the plague ravaging the Torvin homeworld. No payment requested. No conditions attached. Then the Hope vanished like all the others. Magistrate Vaughn stared at the empty space where humanity's fleet had been. He finally understood. This wasn't anger. This wasn't protest. This was disappointment. The humans had expected better from the galaxy's leaders, and when they didn't find it, they left to build something better themselves. The Council would never see them again. 6 months passed before the first reports arrived. Captain Ben Hayes stood on the bridge of the Resolute, studying the holographic display of their new home. They had named it Haven's Reach, a solar system with 4 habitable planets and resources beyond measure. The convoy had split into construction teams, and already the skeleton of a massive station floated in orbit around the second planet. Engineer Rick Coleman wiped sweat from his forehead as he sealed another hull section. The work was brutal, but every human threw themselves into it with fierce determination. No automated construction drones like the Council used. They built everything themselves, welding seam by seam, because they trusted their own hands more than alien technology that might stop working. Back in Council space, things were falling apart. The Crythian Empire, emboldened by the Council's weakness, had expanded their slave raids to 6 more systems. The younger species watched in horror as the Council debated protocol for the 8th consecutive session. Ships from the Thaxian Confederacy began disappearing, their crews taken in the night. Ambassador Krell found himself unable to sleep. He kept replaying the last conversation with the human delegation. Director Paul Stevens had spoken with such quiet intensity. "We came to the stars believing we'd find wisdom," he had said. "Instead, we found politicians." The words haunted Krell because they were true. On Haven's Reach, Dr. Lisa Chen opened the first permanent hospital. The structure was simple, built from local materials, but it had something Council hospitals lacked. It had heart. Every medical officer who volunteered for the colony did so, knowing they were abandoning prestigious positions at Council facilities. They didn't care. They were building something pure. The Diluvian refugees changed everything. Against all protocols, a small group escaped Crythian space in a damaged freighter. They had heard stories about the humans who had argued for their freedom. Using smuggled star charts, they made the desperate journey to find them. When their ship limped into Haven's Reach, barely holding together, Sophie Grant personally led the rescue operation. Commander Jake Morrison made the decision without consulting anyone. The Diluvians could stay. Humanity would protect them. Within days, word spread through underground channels across the galaxy. The humans were accepting refugees. The Council emergency session was chaos. Magistrate Vaughn tried to maintain order as representatives shouted over each other. The humans were violating every non-interference agreement they had ever signed. Technically, they weren't Council members anymore, so those agreements meant nothing. But the precedent was dangerous. If humanity could just ignore Council authority, what stopped others from doing the same? Lieutenant Amy Brooks monitored long-range sensors when she detected them. 15 ships, various species, all heading toward human space. More refugees. She routed the data to Jake Morrison, who studied the readings and smiled. This was exactly what they had hoped for. Not conquest. Not isolation, but building something worth finding. The Crythian Empire sent a battle group to investigate. 23 warships under Admiral Vorath, a brutal commander known for leaving no survivors. They jumped into the Haven's Reach system expecting to find a scattered colony, easy prey. Instead, they found humans ready for war. Ben Hayes had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. The human fleet wasn't large, but it was positioned perfectly. Automated defense platforms surrounded each planet. Weapons powered and locked on targets before the Crythians finished decelerating from their jump. Vorath opened communication channels, his reptilian features twisted in amusement. "You have refugees that belong to the Empire," he growled. "Surrender them and we will consider leaving your colony intact." The transmission was meant to intimidate. Jake Morrison responded from the Resolute. The humans had elected him as their civilian commander. But right now his military experience showed through. Those people are under our protection. You have 10 minutes to leave our system. His voice carried no anger, no fear, just absolute certainty. The Crythian admiral laughed. "Your tiny fleet against the Empire's finest warriors? I will enjoy watching your ships burn." He cut the transmission and ordered his weapons online. What happened next would be discussed in tactical academies for generations. The human ships didn't charge forward in some heroic assault. They didn't try to match the Crythian firepower. Instead, they executed a strategy so ruthlessly efficient that it bordered on art. Sophie Grant's tactical team had studied every known Crythian engagement for months. They knew how the Empire fought, how they positioned ships, how they expected enemies to react. The humans gave them none of those reactions. The defense platforms opened fire first, not at the warships, but at specific points in space. The Crythians laughed at the missed shots until those points erupted in electromagnetic pulses. The humans had seeded the system with mines that didn't explode, but instead created zones of sensor chaos. Half-blind, the Crythian formation broke apart, trying to re-establish targeting locks. That's when the human ships struck. They came in fast and low, using the planet's gravity wells to slingshot between targets. Small, precise weapons fired at engine clusters and weapon arrays. Not trying to destroy the massive warships, just cripple them. Admiral Vorath realized too late that he was fighting an enemy that didn't care about honor or glory. The humans fought to win, using every advantage, exploiting every weakness. Within 18 minutes, 12 of his ships were drifting powerless. The others were taking damage faster than their shields could compensate. Rick Coleman watched from the station as another Crythian cruiser went dark, its weapons offline. This wasn't the clean warfare shown in Council training simulations. This was humans doing what they did best, adapting, improvising, and refusing to lose. Vorath screamed orders at his remaining ships, trying to salvage the situation. His flagship took 3 direct hits to the port side, shields flickering as power systems struggled to compensate. The humans pressed their advantage without mercy. Every disabled ship received a warning broadcast to evacuate to escape pods. Those who complied, those who tried to bring weapons back online, found themselves floating in vacuum moments later. The battle ended in 41 minutes. Not a single human ship suffered critical damage. 17 Crythian warships drifted as lifeless hulks, their crews in escape pods surrounded by human recovery teams. 6 ships managed to jump away, carrying tales of a fight they never expected to lose. Jake Morrison ordered the Crythian survivors brought aboard for processing. They would be treated well, fed, given medical attention, then loaded onto one of their own captured ships and sent home with a message. Tell your empire that humanity protects its own. Tell them what happens when they threaten innocent people. Tell them to stay away. News of the battle spread faster than light itself, carried by traders and smugglers through every jump point in known space. Humanity, the species that left the Council in silence, had just humiliated the Crythian Empire. Ambassador Krell received the reports in his quarters and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: hope. The council convened 3 days later. Magistrate Von looked older somehow, the weight of poor decisions visible in every movement. Representatives argued about appropriate responses, but their hearts weren't in it. Everyone knew the truth. The humans had done what the council refused to do. They stood up to tyranny and won. On Haven's Reach, the work continued. The Diluvian refugees had skills in agriculture and engineering that proved invaluable. They taught humans about crops that thrived in low-gravity environments. In return, humans shared defensive tactics and construction techniques. It was cooperation born from necessity, but it grew into genuine friendship. Dr. Lisa Chen found herself treating species she had only read about in medical texts. Each refugee ship brought new challenges, different biology, different needs, different traumas from their escapes. She worked 18-hour days and never complained once. This was why she became a doctor, not to serve in comfortable council facilities, but to help people who desperately needed it. Lieutenant Amy Brooks tracked another wave of incoming ships, 22 vessels this time, representing 7 different species. All refugees, all fleeing persecution or slavery. The human leadership held an emergency meeting to discuss capacity concerns. The colony was growing faster than planned. Sophie Grant argued for controlled expansion. "We can't save everyone if we collapse under the weight," she said. "Build infrastructure first, then accept more refugees." It was logical, practical, and completely ignored by the vote. Humanity would not turn away people in need. They would figure out the logistics as they went. The second Crythian attack came without warning. This time they sent a full armada, 60 to 8 warships, under Fleet Commander Dracus. The Empire had studied the first battle, adapted their tactics, and come prepared for human trickery. They jumped into the system in a tight formation, shields overlapping, sensors sweeping for any hidden surprises. Ben Hayes watched them arrive and felt his stomach tighten. This was different. These ships moved with discipline and coordination the first group lacked. The humans were outnumbered 4-1, and conventional tactics wouldn't work twice. Commander Jake Morrison made the hardest call of his life. He ordered all civilian ships to begin evacuation procedures. The colony had been building for 7 months, but they couldn't defend against these numbers. Better to run and rebuild than to die for pride. The order went out across all channels, and chaos erupted on every habitat and station. Rick Coleman refused to leave his post. If the defensive platforms were going to have any effect, someone needed to coordinate their fire manually. He sealed himself in the control center and started running combat simulations. There had to be a way to buy time for the evacuation. Fleet Commander Dracus opened a channel to the human ships. "I offer you one chance for survival. Surrender all refugees. Surrender your fleet. Submit to Imperial authority. You have 2 hours to decide." The transmission ended before Jake could respond. Sophie Grant pulled up tactical displays, running scenario after scenario. Every simulation ended the same way. The humans lost, not just lost, but were completely destroyed. The Crythians had overwhelming firepower and better positioning. Any attempt at clever tactics would fail against an enemy prepared for them. Amy Brooks detected movement on long-range sensors. New contacts jumping into the system, but not from Crythian space. Her voice cracked slightly when she made the report. Multiple unknown vessels approaching from Council space. Transponder codes indicate Thaxian Confederacy, Zepharian Defense Force, and various independent ships. Numbers still coming in. Aboard his flagship, Commander Dracus saw them too. His tactical officer counted 43 ships of various designs, all moving to position themselves between the Crythian Armada and the human colony. The communication came from Ambassador Krell himself. The Taxian stood on his bridge, all forearms spread wide. Fleet Commander Dracus, you are in violation of multiple Council laws. These people are under our protection. You will withdraw immediately. Other ships added their voices. Zepharian cruisers powered weapons, independent freighters that had been modified with military hardware locked targeting systems on Crythian vessels. Magistrate Vaughn appeared on every view screen in the system. His aged face showed determination instead of the usual political calculation. The Council has been weak. We have failed in our duty to protect the innocent. Today, that ends. Any attack on this colony will be considered an attack on the Council itself. We are prepared to enforce this declaration. Jake Morrison couldn't believe what he was seeing. The same council that refused to help the Diluvians now stood ready to fight for humanity's right to help them. It made no sense until he understood. This wasn't about humans. This was about younger species watching the council's example and finding the courage to demand better. Dracus calculated his odds. He had 68 ships against a combined force of 60 human and council vessels. He could probably win, but the casualties would be staggering. The Empire would question why he spent so many resources for a handful of refugees. His political enemies would use the losses against him. The fleet commander made his choice. All vessels, prepare for jump to home coordinates. We are withdrawing. His bridge crew looked shocked, but they obeyed. Within minutes, the entire Crythian armada vanished in brilliant flashes of light, leaving the system in stunned silence. Ben Hayes let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Sophie Grant slumped in her chair, the tension draining from her body. Rick Coleman emerged from the control center, looking like he had aged 10 years. They had been prepared to die defending the colony, and now they didn't have to. Ambassador Krell's image appeared on the main view screen. "Commander Morrison," he said formally, then paused. His forearms made a gesture that humans had learned meant deep respect. "We owe you an apology. You showed us what we should have been all along." The transmission ended, and the Council fleet began organizing into defensive positions around Haven's Reach. The next 3 weeks transformed everything. The Council ships didn't leave. They established a permanent presence in the system, calling it a humanitarian protection zone. More refugees arrived every day, and now they came openly, rather than through smuggled routes. The underground networks that helped slaves escape suddenly had official support. Dr. Lisa Chen found herself training Council medical officers on trauma treatment. The techniques humans developed for helping refugees deal with their experiences were revolutionary. Council medicine focused on physical injuries and ignored psychological damage. Lisa taught them that healing the mind was just as important as healing the body. Lieutenant Amy Brooks worked with Taxian sensor operators to establish a warning network. If the Crythians returned, they would have advance notice. The cooperation was awkward at first, but competence overcame cultural differences. Soon human and alien officers worked together like they had been doing it for years. Magistrate Vaughn made a personal visit to Haven's Reach, arriving on a small diplomatic shuttle with minimal escort. Jake Morrison met him at the docking bay, unsure what to expect. The old Zepharian looked tired but peaceful, like he had finally found something worth fighting for. They spoke for 3 hours in the station's observation lounge. Vaughn explained how the Council had become paralyzed by bureaucracy, how fear of change kept them from taking meaningful action. When humanity left, It created a vacuum that younger species rushed to fill. Those species demanded reform, demanded action, and the old guard could no longer resist. "Your departure was a catalyst," Bourne said quietly. "We mourned your loss, but your absence made us examine our failures. When you took in the Diluvians, you showed us the path forward. When you fought the Crythians and won, you proved that standing up to tyranny was possible." We had forgotten these simple truths. Jake listened without interrupting. Part of him wanted to be angry at the council for waiting so long, for only acting when embarrassed into it, but he recognized genuine change when he saw it. Vaughan wasn't making excuses. He was acknowledging mistakes and trying to do better. On the fourth planet of Haven's Reach, construction crews broke ground on something unprecedented. A joint academy where humans and council species would train together in everything from medicine to engineering to defensive tactics. It would be small at first, but the symbolism was powerful. Humans were no longer leaving the galaxy. They were reshaping it. Sophie Grant led the military curriculum design. She insisted on practical training over theory, on adaptability over rigid doctrine. Council officers struggled with the approach at first. They were used to following established procedures, not improvising solutions. But gradually they began to understand humans didn't win fights through superior firepower. They won through creativity and determination. Rick Coleman supervised the construction of a massive shipyard in orbit around the third planet. The design incorporated human efficiency with council technology, creating a hybrid that exceeded both. Ships built here would be faster, tougher, and more adaptable than anything currently in service. The first vessel, a medium cruiser named Unity, would be ready for launch in 6 months. The Crivian Empire watched these developments with growing concern. Their intelligence reports painted a troubling picture. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. More importantly, they were spreading ideas that threatened imperial control. Slave populations across conquered worlds heard about humanity's refuge and began organizing resistance movements. Emperor Kragoth jolkai his war council to discuss the human problem. His advisors argued for overwhelming force, a fleet so large that even council support wouldn't matter. Others counseled patience, suggesting the alliance between humans and the council would fracture on its own. The Emperor listened to all perspectives before making his decision. Back on Haven's Reach, the first class of Joint Academy students completed basic training. 50 humans and 50 council species from various worlds stood together at graduation. They had learned to trust each other, to fight alongside each other, to see past differences and focus on shared values. When they dispersed to their assignments, they carried those lessons with them. Ambassador Krell found himself promoted to Council Security Director, a position created specifically to coordinate the new humanitarian protection efforts. His first act was to establish rapid response teams that could intervene when species faced slavery or genocide. The teams were small, just 5 ships each, but they represented something the Council had never had before, the will to act quickly and decisively. Dr. Lisa Chen received a delegation from the Torvin homeworld, the species humanity had saved from plague before leaving Council space. They brought gifts and gratitude, but more importantly, they brought expertise in biotechnology that could revolutionize medicine. The collaboration produced treatments for diseases that had plagued dozens of species for generations. Lieutenant Amy Brooks detected the anomaly during a routine sensor sweep. A single ship, badly damaged, broadcasting a distress signal from outside known space. The transponder codes were scrambled, but the hull configuration matched Crythian design. She reported it immediately, knowing this could be a trap. Ben Hayes took the Resolute to investigate personally. If it was a trap, better to spring it deliberately than let it surprise them later. The frigate Darwin and 2 Council escort ships joined him. They approached the derelict carefully, weapons ready, shields at maximum. What they found changed everything. The ship was definitely Crythian, but it was fleeing the Empire, not serving it. The crew were slaves who had stolen the vessel during the revolt. They had heard about humanity's refuge and made a desperate run for freedom. Ben brought them aboard the Resolute for medical treatment. Their leader, a scarred fighter named Kelvin from a species humans had never encountered, explained what was happening across Imperial space. The stories about humans protecting refugees had inspired slave uprisings on 14 worlds. The Empire was fracturing from within. Resources stretched thin trying to maintain control. Jake Morrison called an emergency meeting with Council leadership. This was bigger than anyone had anticipated. If the Empire collapsed chaotically, billions could die in the resulting power vacuum. But if they could support organized resistance movements, coordinate safe passage for freed populations, the transition could save countless lives. Magistrate Vaughn proposed something radical: a joint liberation fleet. Human ships working alongside Council vessels, not to conquer territory but to evacuate populations from war zones and protect resistance movements long enough to establish stable governments. It would be expensive, dangerous, and politically complicated. The Council voted to approve it unanimously. Sophie Grant helped train the first wave of liberation specialists. These weren't soldiers, but negotiators, engineers, and medics who could drop into chaotic situations and help establish order. They learned to work with local resistance leaders, to respect existing power structures, rather than impose their own. Every team included both humans and Council species, visible proof that cooperation worked. Rick Coleman's shipyard accelerated production. They needed transport vessels more than warships, huge cargo haulers that could evacuate entire cities when fighting got too intense. The designs prioritized capacity and durability over speed or weapons. Each ship could carry 10,000 people and their essential belongings to safety. Dr. Lisa Chen organized mobile hospital units that could deploy anywhere in days. The units were self-contained with their own power generation and life support. They treated everyone, regardless of species or allegiance, earning trust in war zones where trust was rare. Former Imperial soldiers often surrendered to medical teams rather than face execution by their own officers for showing weakness. Lieutenant Amy Brooks coordinated the logistics network that made everything possible. Food, medicine, construction materials, all flowing from Haven's Reach to dozens of liberation zones. The supply chain was vulnerable, but Council ships provided escorts and alternative routes when Imperial forces tried to disrupt them. The first major success came on the world of Murthax Prime. A slave population of 3 million had revolted, but Imperial reinforcements were days away. The Liberation Fleet arrived first, evacuating the vulnerable and helping the resistance fortify their positions. When Imperial ships arrived, they found a planet ready to defend itself, backed by human and Council forces. The Empire chose to withdraw rather than fight a battle they couldn't win quickly. Ambassador Krell watched the same pattern repeat across Imperial space. Not every intervention succeeded. Some populations couldn't be reached in time. Some resistance movements fell apart internally, but enough victories accumulated that the momentum became undeniable. The Empire was losing its grip, and everyone knew it. Emperor Kragoth made one final attempt to reverse the tide. He gathered every available warship, over 300 vessels, and personally led an assault on Haven's Reach. If he could destroy the humans and their symbol of resistance, perhaps the rebellions would lose heart. It was a desperate gamble by a tyrant who saw his power crumbling. The battle for Haven's Reach lasted 6 hours. The Imperial fleet was massive, but they faced a prepared defense. Human tactical innovation combined with Council firepower created a fighting force that refused to break. Rick Coleman's defensive platforms performed beyond specifications. Ben Hayes coordinated ship movements with split-second precision. Sophie Grant's training exercises proved their worth as crews executed complex maneuvers under fire. The turning point came when freed slave populations from 3 different worlds arrived in their own ships, cobbled together vessels they had repaired and armed. They jumped into the system behind the Imperial fleet and opened fire. They weren't skilled warriors, but their courage was absolute. They remembered who had given them sanctuary when everyone else turned away. Emperor Kragoth watched his formation dissolve into chaos. He had committed everything to this attack, and it was failing. Worse, his own people were abandoning him. Ship after ship broke formation, captains choosing to surrender or flee rather than die for a cause they no longer believed in. The Emperor's flagship took critical damage, life support failing, shields gone. Jake Morrison received the surrender request personally. Kragoff appeared on screen, his imperial regalia torn and burned, blood running from a head wound. He expected execution or imprisonment, the fate he had given so many others. Instead, Jake offered medical treatment and safe passage to a neutral world. "We don't fight for vengeance," he explained. "We fight for something better." The Empire ceased to exist that day, not through conquest, but through rejection. Freed populations established their own governments. Some succeeded, some failed, but they all had the chance to try. The Liberation Fleet stayed active for 2 more years, helping stabilize regions and mediate disputes. Haven's Reach grew into a hub of galactic civilization. The colony expanded across all 4 planets, each world developing its own character and purpose. Refugees became citizens, their children growing up in schools that taught cooperation and mutual respect. The Academy trained thousands of officers who spread those values throughout the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Chen eventually retired from fieldwork and focused on research. Her techniques for treating psychological trauma became standard across civilized space. She watched her students go on to open clinics on hundreds of worlds, each carrying forward the simple principle that healing should be available to everyone who needed it. Lieutenant Amy Brooks took command of her own ship, the courier vessel Pathfinder. She spent her career exploring beyond known space, finding lost colonies and isolated populations who needed help. Everywhere she went, people knew the name of humanity and the refuge they had created. Magistrate Vaughn served 15 more years before retiring. On his last day in office, he visited the monument humans had built on Haven's Reach. It was a simple wall listing the names of every refugee who had died trying to reach freedom. Thousands of names from dozens of species. Vaughn ran his hand across the engraved letters and wept, because now he understood what humanity had tried to teach the Council from the beginning. Every name mattered. Every life was worth protecting. Ambassador Krell lived to see the galaxy transform into something resembling what humans had dreamed it could be. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. When asked about humanity's decision to leave the Council all those years ago, he always gave the same answer. They didn't abandon us. They showed us who we could be if we had the courage to try.